So, I started watching My Hero Academia at around 2022. I saw the first 4 episodes, which make up the entrance exam arc. And younger me at the time ultimately wrote off the series as being not for me. About 2 years later, though, I decided to give the series a second chance after watching some videos analyzing it that made it sound quite interesting. And I ended up enjoying it quite a bit. But while I was watching the first couple of episodes, there was something on my mind. What was so bad about Deku as a protagonist? Before I got into the series, most of what I've heard about Deku at that point was tons upon tons of videos and posts criticizing his character, talking about what an apparently awful protagonist he was, and I just couldn't see it. I didn't think he was the greatest protagonist of all time or anything, no, but he was still funny and endearing enough for me to keep watching. And I thought that having to watch him learn how to control and work with his power was an interesting enough conflict for him. I went out to my Tomo blog to ask this question because I was confused as to why such a seemingly innocent and inoffensive character was getting such strong, overwhelmingly negative reactions from people all across the internet. And then when I eventually sat down and looked up for reasons as to why people apparently hated him so much, I didn't find the reasons to be compelling in the slightest. And as I got further into the series, Deku slowly started becoming one of my favorite characters in the series. I consider him to be one of the best running characters in the main cast. So that's why this video exists today. I'm going to go through and analyze all of Deku's growth throughout the series and debunk many of the common criticisms towards his character. Note that since there are so many bad faith takes around Deku's character, I'm only going to be focusing on the ones that are most commonly used. If I go and talk about literally every single one that I've seen, we'll probably be here for around 200 years. Instead, we'll be here for around 100 instead. Since I wasn't really around for a majority of the discourse surrounding this series because I was about 5 when it first came out. If there are any criticisms that I missed, please go and tell me. I've been searching all around the internet for them. But without further ado, let's begin, shall we? We will start with the beginning chapter of the series, Izuku Midoryia Origin. Since it's, the first chapter of the series, it establishes some of the core traits of who Deku is, thus his fixation on heroes, with him observing the battle between some heroes and the giant villain and taking notes on his notebook, analyzing their quirks. Another big personality trait that we see here, and one of the parts that makes it pretty endearing, is his heavy admiration for All Might. We then shown a flashback of how when Deku was little, he watched a video when All Might made his debut, saving people from a disaster, which sets up another trait for our protagonist and the thing that he's most driven by, his desire to become a hero. And we see in this flashback that All Might was the main inspiration for Deku to want to be a hero, as seeing someone be able to save others with a smile on his face made Deku want to be like him. Having that admiration be the one thing that drives him into being a hero. Wanting to be someone who can be able to save others with that same exact fearless smile that All Might displayed. Unfortunately, however, Deku gets diagnosed as quirkless, making him completely unable to be a hero, and unable to be someone like All Might who can save others with a smile, unable to live out his dream. But, in spite of that, Deku continues to cling on to that dream. He still chooses to apply for U.A. despite knowing full well that it will get him laughed at by his classmates, rationalizing it by using the reason that it doesn't hurt to try. Still continuing to aim to be a hero for his future, insisting that he doesn't care what others tell him and that he will continue moving forward and cling on to that dream, even when he's been taught his whole life that that dream is impossible. He even goes and asks All Might if someone without a quirk can be a hero. And Deku desperately wants someone to tell him that he can be a hero. Give him the validation he always wanted, so he can finally have the confidence in himself to believe in the idea that he can be a hero fully. The kid had it hammered into him his whole life that he could never be the one thing that he always wanted. And now, as a last resort, he goes to his own idol hoping for that validation. But in spite of that, All Might responds with the truth that Deku already knew deep down. He can't be a hero without a quirk. The person he admired the most had told him that he couldn't achieve his dreams. And so, Deku walks down the street sad and dejected, finally giving up on trying to make himself believe something that he knows isn't true, fully admitting to himself that he constantly tried so hard to make himself believe a lie. This is an interesting characterization, as it shows how Deku's been coping with this realization. how he couldn't accept the hard reality that he wasn't capable of achieving what he desired, how he continued to try and cling onto his dream and sought validation so he can make himself be confident in his unattainable dream. And then he sees Bakugo, his former childhood friend, caught by the same sludge villain that attacked him earlier. And this is where we see the last core trait of Deku's character we'll talk about here. And it's arguably his biggest strength and flaw, his innate heroism and his willingness to immediately rush in to save others in imminent danger. The chapter starts off showing this quality with a flashback of when Deku was younger, where Deku stands up to a kid being bullied by Bakugo and his friends. He is clearly shaking and scared, crying even, knowing full well that he's going to get his ass kicked by Bakugo and his friends. And clearly he does still fear Bakugo quite a bit in general. However, in spite of all of that, Deku goes and stands up for that kid anyway, attempting to protect him from his own bullies. Which shows how, no matter what, Deku will always go out of his way to save those in need, as he shows he has a naturally heroic heart that will immediately jump into action when the urge to save someone is triggered, even when he faces the person he's fearful of just so he can stand up for that kid. We then get more insight into this desire to save others that Deku has when Deku goes to ask All Might if he could be a hero. He explains that due to his own experience being bullied by others for being quirkless, he views saving someone from those kinds of situations as the best thing someone can do, as he knows what it's like to be in those situations himself. This later scene shows that quality once again, except in a far more extreme sense. Deku is hesitant and scared at first, but the second he sees Bakugo's eyes, something within him immediately triggers. His body starts to move on its own, recklessly running into imminent danger just to save his former childhood friend, in spite of having no quirk and thus no ability to save him, showing his willingness to put himself in danger just to save others. After this moment when All Might comes to save him and Bakugo thanks to him being spurred into action by Deku's attempted heroism, we get the very first piece of growth that Deku gets in the entire series, accepting the fact that he can't be a hero, that he can't be someone like All Might, but that doesn't mean he can't still pursue other careers, showing that he's finally done trying to convince himself into thinking something that he knows isn't true, and that he's now come to terms with the fact that his born quirkless thanks to All Might giving him the wake-up call he needed. However, right after that point, All Might comes, and seeing Deku's heroism, he sees Deku as finally worthy of his quirk, one for all. A quirk passed down by generations to multiple different wielders, declaring the thing that Deku had been longing to hear his whole life: he can be a hero. This first chapter does a really good job of establishing who Deku is, his core traits, and giving us a reason to root for him and want to see him achieve his dreams, setting him up neatly as an underdog protagonist who was trained to achieve his goal. Chapters 2, 3, and 4 don't have that much new for Deku's character, as I've been reinforcing what Chapter 1 already showed us. Chapter 2 continues showing his admiration for All Might being a driving force to him to want to be a hero, by showing him rushing to make his body fit for one for all, as well as establishing him being a hard worker. In Chapter 3 has him immediately go to save Trico's life the second he sees her about to get crushed by the giant-ass robots during the entrance exam, murdering his arm in the process, as well as meeting Ida and, like I said earlier, a Chaco. And lastly, Chapter 4 has him being rewarded for his past heroism in the previous chapter, with him being rewarded with rescue points for saving Chaco's life from the robots. The entrance exam arc does a great job as an introduction to Deku's character, and now I can move right along to the next few arcs, is what I would say, but unfortunately, within just the first 4 chapters, there are already a good few amount of criticisms to address. I'll be going through each critique one by one, going with the things that will already be refuted in my analysis of the first chapter. First, there is criticism that Deku, in spite of wanting to be a hero, never actually tried to do so, with martial arts training being an example of what people think Deku should have done. As I've explained before, though, Deku had already knew that he couldn't be a hero without a quirk, and he knew that any kind of training would be pointless since it won't get him into UA, and since quirkless hearing is highly impractical, which I'll explain later. Way later, which is why he doesn't ever think to take martial arts training. But in spite of that, he still wants to make himself believe in the idea that he could be a hero, because of how much that means to him. You can still want to achieve something while knowing deep down that you'll never be able to get it. And there's a difference between trying to convince yourself to think something versus actually believing in it. Then there's the much bigger critique, the argument that Deku should have never gone one for all in the first place and stayed quirk, instead using gadgets to fight like Batman, which fits a lot better with the theme of anyone can be a hero, rather than just getting a quirk that didn't earn handed to him on a silver platter. Starting with the last argument, Deku did earn one for all. He showed All Might his heroic heart and was willing to put himself in danger with little hesitation to save Bakugo, showing the heroic qualities that All Might was looking for. And even then, he still had to train 6 months just to get the quirk, so he absolutely was not given it on a silver platter. And then there is the other criticism, that Deku should have stayed quirkless, and that would have been better for the themes of the story that anyone can be a hero. My problem with this critique is that it confuses personal preferences with objective critique, and lacks an understanding of what the message actually is supposed to mean. So let's break it down. Yes, My Hero Academia does have a theme of anyone can be a hero, but that's not in a literal sense. Not everyone can be a hero in an actual professional sense. Some people just may not have the skills or tools required to be a hero, but they can still be a hero to others in a spiritual sense. To be someone else's hero, like helping them do something personal or reaching out to them when they're in need of it. This argument also feels like it's rooted in personal preference. A story centering on a quirkless Deku isn't the type of story the Horikoshi is trying to aim for. If the story wants to be about a boy inheriting a power and learning different kinds of ways to control it, then that's perfectly fine. The story isn't bad just because it doesn't fit your personal preferences of what you wanted it to be. Of course, there's still the argument that Deku getting a super powerful quirk means he isn't actually an underdog, or that the story the Horikoshi is aiming for isn't particularly interesting, with some even saying that Deku never had to work as hard as everyone else. All of which our takes I strongly disagree on, because it doesn't matter if you have a super powerful quirk if you don't know how to control it without breaking yourself. And that's what Deku struggles with earlier on in the series, learning to utilize his quirk in different ways to minimize the damage it causes on his body. Since he still doesn't know how to control his quirk without injuring himself, as he tends to focus his power onto one part of his body, he ends up being at a massive disadvantage compared to many of his own peers, who still have perfect control over their powers, while he's still learning how to control his own. So he needs to catch up to be on the same level as his peers. And he's put in situations where he needs to rely on creative strategies and techniques in order to beat his opponents, which creates interesting tension within the fights and does make him an underdog, actually. This starts in the Quirk Test arc, where Deku focuses all of his energy into just his finger to release the ball, allowing it to reach a very significant distance. And we continue seeing this even more in Battle Trial. In Battle Trial, we see Deku flat out trying to fight Bakugo without even using his quirk, using the knowledge he studied from his notebook about Bakugo's quirk, doing techniques such as suplexing him when he surprise attacks him in a Rakugo, and then using the capture tape to grab and pull Bakugo's leg and use it to duck under his attack, until he then comes to realize that he can't beat Bakugo without using his quirk after Bakugo starts being even more aggressive and not giving him that much time to formulate a strategy. So he charges up a Delaware Smash and releases all the energy in an upwards direction, helping Arakugo smash debris towards his direction and capture the missile as a combo strategy, which is another very creative usage of his power and does a very good job of showing his strategic skills in fast-paced situations. These arcs also feature some growth and characterization when it comes to his relationship with Bakugo, specifically with Deku starting to grow a backbone and standing up for himself, which is first shown in the Quirk Test arc, where after some time Deku passes the entrance exam, Bakugo yells at him for getting in, referring back to a previous one in Chapter 1 where he passively aggressively discouraged Deku from getting into UA, but Deku chooses to stand up for himself in the face of his bully, telling Bakugo to his face that no matter what, he's getting to UA and Bakugo ain't gonna stop him. This continues in Battle Trial, where Deku really starts gaining the courage to actually start to challenge Bakugo, yelling at him that he's no longer going to be his punching bag, using the chocolate's earlier recontextualization of the nickname Deku, a nickname Bakugo previously came up with to make fun of him, something meant to instill a feeling of work respect with him. That he's nothing but a quirkless nobody who will never be able to reach Bakugo's level, giving it a new meaning as you can do it, meaning someone who can push through any obstacle or challenge no matter what. Deku does pretty clearly dislike the bullying Bakugo put him through, and fully acknowledges the fact that Bakugo is kind of an asshole, meaning that he isn't just some kind of glazer because it's not like he's blind to the idea that Bakugo is a bitch. But in spite of that, he sees and does admire Bakugo's skills, as he knows full well that Bakugo is a significantly higher level than him. And on an objective level, he's correct. Bakugo is someone who's trained his whole life to master a powerful quirk, while Deku only lives his whole life as quirkless, having no power of his own. He knows how behind he is compared to him, and he wants to work to actually challenge that. He wants Bakugo to recognize that he's no longer going to be his punching bag. He's going to be a legitimate, real rival to him. U.S.J continues Deku coming up with different kinds of strategies to get out of situations, where when the League of Villains make their first attack and the students are all sent to different locations, taking advantage of the villain's lack of knowledge of their quirks to create a strategy, since he knows he can't just murder his whole arm. He once again opts to focus all that energy into just his finger to lose a shock on the water, spread, and then have a rush back to the surface, and then having Suyu grab him with her tongue to get away, with all the villains stuck together thanks to Mineta's sticky balls. And then we get to the sports festival, the arc that fully shows the things I laid out before. Here, we once again see Deku having to traverse the obstacles quirkless, taking a piece from destroyed robots and using it as both a weapon to cut the robot charging at him and as a shield for any debris. And then after getting through this part, we get probably my favorite strategy Deku uses, him digging up all the landmines, holding onto the piece and then jumping on top of the mines to launch himself ahead, and then hitting them once again once he almost touches the ground to reach the finish. The next round, the cavalry battle, doesn't have as much strategic thinking as the last couple of examples, though it does provide some very solid tension as Deku getting first place in the obstacle course gives him 1 million points. We could get him against literally everyone else. We also see him utilize the quirks of Ochako, Tokoyami, and Mei as well when it comes to formulating strategies. And now I think we are finally done with the first section of this video. These first couple of arcs represent the first steps in Deku's character, where he's just starting to get used to his power and trying to learn the ropes of how to work with it. One for All is a quirk practically designed to kill him, so he needs to learn how to be able to control without damaging himself. How is he going to do that? Well, we'll see in the next part.